Maureen's hands trembled as she adjusted her blazer, her dream job slipping through her fingers, not because she failed, but because someone wanted her to. The grand chandelier above her sparkled, its light bouncing off the marble floors of Regency Lux Hotel, the city's most prestigious five-star establishment. Maureen had worked tirelessly to land this job. With years of experience and a degree in hospitality, this position as front desk supervisor was a stepping stone to a brighter future. But standing before her, arms crossed and eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction, was Mr. Langston, the hotel's general manager. "I'm sorry, Miss Davis," he said, loud enough for the gathered staff and guests to hear. "I thought we hired someone more professional. But clearly, we've made a mistake." A murmur rippled through the lobby. Maureen's heart pounded. Professional? The word dripped with hidden meaning, his smirk daring her to protest. "Sir, I don't understand," Maureen said, forcing calm into her voice. "I haven't even started." "You don't fit our brand," Langston interrupted sharply, flicking his hand toward the entrance as if she were a stain to be wiped away. "We need someone who represents luxury, elegance. You should have known better than to waste my time." The humiliation burned. She could feel the stares. Some staff looked away, ashamed. Others smirked. One woman in a sleek black dress whispered to her companion before they both laughed. Maureen clenched her fists at her sides. Every fiber of her being told her to fight back, to demand an explanation. But she knew, there was none. No reason, no just cause. Just a man with power who had already decided her fate. With a slow inhale, Maureen lifted her chin. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't cry. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked out, her heels clicking against the polished floor. But as she pushed open the heavy glass doors, she caught a reflection in the window, Langston's smug expression, watching her leave. His mistake was thinking she was done. He had no idea what was coming. The cold air outside the Regency Lux Hotel hit Maureen like a slap. She barely felt it. Humiliation clung to her like a second skin, hot and suffocating. She had walked into that hotel with dreams of a future, only to be shoved out like she was nothing. She made it halfway down the street before her legs slowed, then stopped. She had nowhere to go. The job at Regency Lux was supposed to be her break. She had left her previous position in anticipation of this one, and now, nothing. Her fingers dug into the strap of her handbag. "Don't cry. Not here. Not now." A car honked, snapping her back to reality. Swallowing hard, Maureen forced herself to move. She needed time to think, to breathe. A string of closed doors. The next few weeks were a slow, grinding descent into uncertainty. She applied for jobs at other hotels, but her rejection was almost immediate. Each time she entered an interview, the manager's expression would shift the moment she introduced herself. Word had spread, Langston had ruined her reputation. Her savings dwindled fast. Bills piled up. She had to survive. So, when a small, struggling hotel on the other side of the city offered her a position, not as a supervisor, but as a janitor, she took it. Each morning, she woke before sunrise, put on her faded uniform, and scrubbed floors in a place where no one even looked at her. Each night, she sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying Langston's words. "You should have known better than to waste my time." It echoed, over and over. And with every replay, the sting lessened, replaced by something else. A slow, rising anger. A letter she never expected. One night, weeks after her fall from grace, Maureen came home exhausted. The work was brutal, the pay barely enough, but she kept going. She dropped her bag on the counter and was about to kick off her shoes when she noticed something strange. An envelope lay on her small kitchen table. She frowned. She hadn't heard the door, and she hadn't received mail in weeks. Curious, She opened it. Inside was an elegant invitation, printed on expensive cardstock. You are cordially invited to an exclusive business event at the Regency Lux Hotel. Maureen's breath caught. Her eyes darted to the date, tomorrow night. She turned the invitation over, searching for a sender. Nothing. Why? Why would they invite her? Then, a thought struck her, was this a joke? A cruel trick from Langston to humiliate her again? Or, was it something else? Maureen's fingers tightened around the invitation. Something was off. But one thing was certain, she was going. Whatever this was, she needed to find out. And maybe, just maybe, this was the moment her comeback truly began. Maureen stood outside Regency Lux Hotel, staring up at its grand facade. The golden light from the chandeliers spilled onto the street, illuminating the revolving glass doors. The last time she walked through them, she left in disgrace. Now, she was back. Clutching the invitation in her hand, she exhaled sharply. What if this was a setup? What if Langston wanted to humiliate her again? Her instincts screamed for her to turn around. But another voice, deeper and stronger, whispered. This time, you're not leaving empty-handed. She squared her shoulders and walked inside. A different kind of attention. The moment she stepped into the lobby, heads turned. Not in mockery like before, but in curiosity. Staff whispered among themselves. What is she doing here? Maureen ignored them. She wasn't here for them. A woman in a sleek black gown approached. Your invitation, please. Maureen handed it over, keeping her expression neutral. The woman studied it, then gave a polite smile. Right this way, Miss Davis. She was led to the grand ballroom, where a crowd of elite guests mingled. Powerful figures in the hospitality industry sipped champagne, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Maureen felt out of place in her second-hand dress, but she stood tall. She wasn't here for luxury, she was here for answers. Then, she saw him. Mr. Holloway. The owner of Regency Lux. He stood near the center of the room, surrounded by executives and investors. Unlike Langston, who thrived on arrogance, Holloway carried an air of quiet power. And then, he saw her. His eyebrows lifted in surprise before a slow smile formed. He excused himself from his conversation and walked straight toward her. Maureen's heart pounded. Miss Davis, he said, his voice smooth but sharp. I've been waiting to meet you. The truth behind the invitation. Maureen struggled to hide her shock. You know who I am? Holloway chuckled. Of course. After all, your firing cost me a very valuable client. Maureen blinked. What? Holloway gestured for her to follow him to a quieter corner of the ballroom. Once they were alone, he leaned in. A week after Langston fired you, a high-profile guest, a well-respected businesswoman, filed a complaint. She witnessed everything that happened in the lobby. She was disgusted by the way you were treated and even threatened to pull her investments. Maureen's breath caught. She remembered the woman, the one in the sleek black dress who had whispered to her companion. She thought she was laughing at her, but instead, she had fought for her. Holloway continued, I started digging. I wanted to know why Langston would throw away a promising candidate like you. The more I looked, the more I realized. He paused, his expression darkening. Langston has been running this hotel like his personal kingdom, and your firing was just one of many questionable decisions. Maureen clenched her fists. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed only fueled her anger. Why am I here? She asked, her voice steady. Holloway smiled. Because I need someone who sees what others ignore. Someone who understands this hotel from the inside. Someone who's been wronged and has the determination to set things right. A slow realization dawned on her. You want me to Go undercover, Holloway finished. Maureen inhaled sharply. I need someone I can trust, Holloway said. Someone who won't be swayed by power or politics. If you accept, you'll work as an inspector, evaluating everything: staff treatment, financial records, customer experience. And if you find anything unethical? His lips curled. You report straight to me. Maureen's pulse raced. This was it. This was her chance. Langston thought he had destroyed her. He had no idea what was coming. She extended her hand. When do I start? Holloway shook it firmly. Tomorrow. Maureen stood in front of the Regency Lux Hotel, the morning sun casting a golden hue on its towering glass windows. This time, she wasn't here to beg for a job. She was here to expose the truth. Dressed in a simple yet professional outfit, she walked through the revolving doors, feeling the familiar rush of cold air as she stepped inside. The scent of fresh flowers and expensive perfume filled the air. But this time, the luxury didn't intimidate her. It fueled her. She had one mission: to uncover the corruption hiding in plain sight. A silent entrance. Unlike before, Maureen didn't walk through the front desk as a supervisor in training. Instead, she reported to the back offices, where hotel staff rarely interacted with guests. Mr. Holloway had arranged for her to be hired under a false identity, listed in the system as an operations evaluator, a vague enough title that wouldn't raise suspicion. Her role? To observe, listen, and document. The woman handling her paperwork barely glanced at her. You're assigned to general operations. You'll be shadowing different areas of the hotel: housekeeping, room service, guest services. Report anything unusual. Maureen nodded, keeping her expression neutral. She didn't need to be told twice. Langston's kingdom of fear. The first thing she noticed? The fear. Employees walked on eggshells, their eyes darting nervously any time a senior staff member passed. Conversations stopped abruptly whenever someone from management walked by. At first, Maureen thought it was just the usual tension of working in a high-end hotel. But then, she saw it up close. A young front desk worker, nervous, barely out of college, was struggling to enter a guest's request into the system. Maureen watched as Langston himself stormed over. What the hell are you doing? Langston's voice boomed across the lobby. The girl flinched, fumbling with the keyboard. I just... Langston snatched the keyboard out of her hands. Maybe if you weren't so damn incompetent, you wouldn't waste my time. A few guests turned to watch, whispering among themselves. Maureen's stomach tightened. This was the man who called her unprofessional. Langston shoved the keyboard back at the girl and sneered. Screw up again, and you're out. The girl nodded quickly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Langston turned, walking away as if nothing had happened. And Maureen? She memorized every detail. The stolen wages. Over the next few days, Maureen worked her way through different departments. She listened. She observed. And what she found was worse than she imagined. Housekeeping staff were overworked, forced to clean twice as many rooms as they were scheduled for, without overtime pay. Waiters in the hotel restaurant had their tips adjusted, with management taking a cut before they received their share. Guest complaints were covered up, and Langston pocketed refunds meant for customers, keeping the money for himself. The corruption ran deep. Maureen documented everything. Dates. Names. Receipts. Langston thought he was untouchable. But he had no idea what was coming. A dangerous discovery. One evening, as she was finishing up notes in the staff break room, she overheard two waiters whispering. Did you hear what happened to David? One asked. Maureen's ears perked up. Yeah, the other muttered. He spoke up about the missing tips, and now he's suspended. But we all know what that means. Maureen frowned. What do you mean? She asked, playing dumb. The waiters hesitated. Then, one of them sighed. If Langston doesn't like you, you don't get fired. You just disappear. They cut your hours, change your schedule, mess with your paycheck until you quit on your own. Maureen's stomach turned. This wasn't just bad management. This was targeted abuse. And she was next if she wasn't careful. But Maureen had no plans of quitting. She had everything she needed to bring Langston down, she just needed the right moment. And that moment was coming soon. Maureen knew she was running out of time. For the past 2 weeks, she had watched, listened, and gathered proof, evidence that could destroy Langston and expose the corruption hiding within the walls of Regency Lux. But the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it became. Langston was no fool. He ruled the hotel like a tyrant, and Maureen could feel his eyes on her. Something was coming. And she had to strike first. A desperate employee speaks out. One evening, Maureen finished her shift and headed to the back exit where employees left through the service doors. The alley was quiet, dimly lit by a single flickering streetlight. As she stepped outside, she heard a sharp whisper. Maureen. She turned to see Aisha, the young front desk worker Langston had humiliated. The girl's face was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched a folder close to her chest. I need to talk to you, Aisha said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. I know what you're doing. Maureen's pulse quickened. Aisha knew? The girl swallowed hard. You're collecting evidence against Langston, aren't you? Maureen hesitated, then nodded. Aisha exhaled shakily. I need to show you something. She thrust the folder into Maureen's hands. It's proof. Payroll documents. He's been stealing from the staff. Cutting hours, taking tips, adjusting paychecks. It's all in there. Maureen opened the folder and felt her stomach twist. It was all there. Pages of payroll discrepancies, adjustments that made no sense, staff who were supposed to be paid one amount but received far less. Aisha looked around nervously. I made copies, but if Langston finds out. Maureen placed a steady hand on her shoulder. You did the right thing, she said softly. I'll make sure this gets into the right hands. Aisha's eyes glistened. She nodded, then hurried away before anyone could see her. Maureen clutched the folder, her heart pounding. She had everything she needed. Now, she just had to find the perfect moment to expose the truth. Langston's suspicion grows. The next morning, the atmosphere in the hotel was different. There was a tension in the air, like an approaching storm. As Maureen moved through the hallways, she noticed whispers between employees, nervous glances. Then, she caught sight of Langston. He stood near the front desk, arms crossed, watching her. Her stomach tightened. He knew something. As she walked past him, he called out. Davis. She turned, forcing a neutral expression. Yes, sir. Langston tilted his head. You've been awfully busy lately. Always asking questions. Always poking around. Maureen kept her voice calm. I'm just doing my job. Langston's smirk didn't reach his eyes. Is that right? He took a slow step forward. Because I have a feeling you're doing a lot more than that. Maureen met his gaze, refusing to look away. For a long moment, they stared at each other, a silent battle of wills. Then, Langston chuckled. Be careful, Davis. People who dig too deep sometimes find themselves in unfortunate situations. A threat. Clear as day. But Maureen didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled. Funny. I was about to say the same thing to you. Langston's smirk faltered, just for a second. Then, with a huff, he turned and walked away. Maureen exhaled slowly. She had to move fast. Langston was getting suspicious. And if she wasn't careful, she'd be his next target. The perfect opportunity. That afternoon, Maureen received an email that changed everything. It was from Mr. Holloway. Investor meeting tomorrow, Regency Lux Grand Hall. All senior staff required to attend. Maureen stared at the screen, her mind racing. This was it. A room full of investors. Important guests. The perfect moment to expose Langston in front of the most powerful people in the industry. She grabbed the folder Aisha had given her, along with her own documented proof. Tomorrow, everything would come to light. And Langston would finally fall. The clock on Maureen's phone read 7:45 a.m. She stood outside Regency Lux's Grand Hall, gripping the folder of evidence in her hands. The investor meeting was set to begin in 15 minutes, and inside, the most powerful figures in the hotel industry were gathering. This was her one chance to expose Langston. Her heart pounded, but she pushed down the nerves. No second-guessing. No hesitation. Today, she was taking back her dignity. Inside the lion's den. Maureen stepped into the lavish grand hall, where the meeting was already coming to life. The massive crystal chandelier bathed the room in a golden glow, and round tables were arranged in perfect symmetry, each occupied by powerful investors, high-profile guests, and key members of the hotel's senior staff. At the far end of the room, on an elevated platform, Langston stood beside Mr. Holloway, exchanging pleasantries with investors. The sight of Langston, calm, composed, acting as if he were the face of integrity, made Maureen's stomach turn. But that would change soon. She made her way toward the back of the room, where a large projector screen was set up for presentations. That was her stage. A crucial ally. Maureen. She turned and saw Aisha, the young receptionist who had risked everything to give her proof of Langston's corruption. Her hands were clenched at her sides. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. "Once you do this, there's no turning back." Maureen's jaw tightened. "That's exactly why I have to do it." Aisha hesitated, then nodded. "Okay. Just, be careful." Maureen gave her a reassuring look. "Trust me." Aisha exhaled shakily, then reached into her pocket and handed Maureen a USB drive. "Security footage," she whispered. "From the finance office. It shows Langston taking cash from the hotel's safe. If anyone doubts the payroll records, this will back it up." Maureen's eyes widened. This was it. The final nail in Langston's coffin. She took the USB, gripping it tightly. "You just made sure he won't escape this." Aisha gave her a nervous smile before slipping away. Now, it was up to Maureen. The meeting begins. At exactly 8 a.m., Mr. Holloway took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he greeted, his voice smooth and commanding. "Thank you all for joining us today. Regency Lux has long been a symbol of excellence in the hospitality industry, and today, we will discuss new strategies for maintaining our standard of service." Applause followed, and Maureen spotted Langston smirking beside him, arrogant, untouchable. Holloway gestured toward him. "I would like to introduce someone who has played a key role in overseeing our daily operations. Mr. Langston, our general manager." Langston stepped forward, flashing a polished, confident smile. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway." He adjusted his tie, projecting calm authority. "It has been an honor to serve this establishment and ensure our continued success." More polite applause. Maureen felt sick. Enough. It was time. The interruption. Before Langston could continue, Maureen stood up. Loudly. Deliberately. "I have something to say." The room fell silent. Langston's head snapped toward her, his smirk faltering. "Excuse me?" Maureen stepped forward, her pulse racing, but her voice steady. "I have evidence that this hotel is being run through corruption, intimidation, and theft." A murmur spread across the room. Investors exchanged concerned glances. Mr. Holloway frowned. "Miss Davis, what is this about?" Langston's face darkened. "This is nonsense." Maureen ignored him. She turned to the projector screen. Aisha, standing near the tech booth, gave a quick nod. And then, she pressed play. The evidence that changed everything. The screen flickered to life, showing a compilation of damning evidence. Documents of payroll theft. Employees who were promised wages but were paid less, their salaries mysteriously adjusted. Footage of Langston taking cash from the hotel's financial office, proof that he had been stealing from the business itself. Testimonies from staff, exposing the abuse they endured, threats, intimidation, stolen tips. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Some investors gasped. Others whispered furiously. Langston's face turned red. This is fabricated," he shouted, stepping forward. "You can't believe this nonsense." But no one was looking at him anymore. They were looking at Mr. Holloway, whose expression had turned to cold fury. "Enough," Holloway said, his voice dangerously calm. Langston froze. "I want an explanation," Holloway demanded. "Right. Now." Langston opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He was caught. And for the first time, he knew it. Security arrives. The doors burst open, and 2 security guards stepped inside. Langston took a step back. "Wait, this is a mistake." But Holloway wasn't listening. He turned to the security team. "Escort him out." Langston snapped. "You can't do this to me. I built this hotel. I made this place what it is." But no one defended him. Not a single investor. Not a single staff member. Langston had spent years building fear, but in the end, it had left him with nothing. Security grabbed him by the arms, dragging him toward the exit. His furious protests faded into the hallway. And then, he was gone. Maureen's victory. Silence filled the room. All eyes turned to Maureen. Mr. Holloway, after a long moment, nodded. "Miss Davis," he said, his voice firm but calm. "I believe we owe you an apology." The investors nodded in agreement. One even muttered, "I can't believe we trusted him." Holloway sighed. "We'll be conducting a full audit. And as for you," his gaze softened. "I think you've earned a better position than the one you originally applied for." Maureen's breath caught. And then, applause. It started with Aisha. Then the investors. Then the rest of the room. Maureen exhaled, feeling the weight of her humiliation lift. She had done it. She had taken back her dignity. And now, for the first time in weeks, she smiled. The moment Langston was dragged out of Regency Lux, the news spread like wildfire. Within hours, staff members whispered in break rooms, guests murmured in the hallways, and investors exchanged shocked glances. By the next morning, Langston's downfall was the headline story in the hospitality industry. Luxury hotel scandal, general manager exposed for corruption and employee mistreatment. Regency Lux shakeup, senior staff fired amidst explosive allegations. But in the center of it all, was Maureen. The staff's reaction. For weeks, the employees of Regency Lux had worked in fear, afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of speaking up. But now? Now they stood taller. Housekeeping staff smiled for the first time in months. Servers who had been forced to work extra hours without pay felt a weight lift off their shoulders. And Aisha? She walked to the front desk with confidence, no longer afraid that a single mistake would cost her livelihood. One by one, employees came up to Maureen. A young bellboy shook her hand, his voice grateful. "You saved us." An older housekeeper patted her shoulder. "We thought no one cared. But you fought for us." Even employees who had never spoken to her before, security guards, kitchen staff, valet workers, offered her nods of respect as she walked through the halls. Maureen had arrived at Regency Lux as an outsider. Now, she was their champion. A meeting with Mr. Holloway. A few days later, Maureen was summoned to Mr. Holloway's office. She stepped inside, the luxurious decor a stark contrast to the break rooms and service hallways she had spent weeks in. Holloway sat behind his large oak desk, studying her. Then, after a moment, he smiled. "You did something very few people could do, Maureen," he said. "You took down a man who thrived on intimidation and power." Maureen stayed quiet, unsure of where this was going. Holloway leaned back in his chair. "I made a mistake when I let Langston have full control of this hotel. I trusted the wrong man. But you showed me the kind of leadership we actually need." He reached into his desk, pulled out a gold-trimmed document, and slid it across the table. Maureen hesitated, then picked it up. Her breath caught. It was an offer letter. A high-level management position. Not just in Regency Lux, but across all of Holloway's hotels. "You want me to," she started, but Holloway nodded. "Help me fix this industry. Not just here, but in all my hotels. Employees deserve better. And I think you're the perfect person to ensure they get it." Maureen was speechless. Just weeks ago, she had been humiliated in this very hotel, thrown out as if she was worthless. Now, she was being offered a role that could change the entire system. She looked up, her voice firm. "I accept." Holloway smiled. "Welcome to the team, Miss Davis." Langston's last attempt. The day after Maureen accepted her new role, she received an unexpected email. It was from Langston. Her hands tightened around her phone as she read the message. "You think you won, but this isn't over. You ruined my career, and you will regret it." A slow, cold anger settled in Maureen's chest. Langston was still trying to intimidate her. She clicked delete without responding. Because for the first time, she wasn't afraid of him anymore. Langston was finished. And Maureen? She was just getting started. Langston had always believed himself to be untouchable. For years, he had built his kingdom inside Regency Lux, ruling through fear and intimidation. He had controlled employees' futures with a single word, crushing careers and silencing complaints before they could rise. But now, his kingdom was in ruins. And for the first time in his life, no one was listening to him. Langston's desperate plea. After his public disgrace, Langston tried everything to regain his footing. He reached out to former allies, investors he had once dined with, executives he had done shady favors for. No one answered his calls. The few that did? They all said the same thing. "You're a liability now." Langston clenched his fists. He had spent years building these relationships, thinking his influence was permanent. But the truth was clear. Power built on fear disappears the moment people stop fearing you. And Maureen? She hadn't just exposed his corruption. She had taken away his power. Lawsuits and investigations. A few weeks after his termination, Langston found himself sitting in a lawyer's office, staring at a thick stack of legal documents. Employee lawsuits. A financial investigation. A formal complaint filed by Regency Lux's investors. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman with little patience for nonsense, folded her hands and spoke coldly. "You have two choices, Mr. Langston. You fight these charges, knowing you'll likely lose, or you settle quietly and disappear. Langston's stomach churned. His reputation was shattered. No luxury hotel would ever hire him again. And now, his own wealth was at risk. He had stolen hundreds of thousands from employees' wages, taken bribes, and falsified reports, all of which was now exposed. He was finished. Completely. Irrevocably. Finished. The job offers that never came. After being blacklisted from the hospitality industry, Langston tried desperately to find a new job. He applied everywhere: hotels, casinos, resorts, private clubs. And every single time? Rejected. No one wanted a corrupt former manager with a lawsuit over his head. For the first time in decades, Langston found himself on the other side, jobless, powerless, and humiliated. Just like he had made so many others feel. A bitter ending. One evening, months after his downfall, Langston sat alone in a rundown apartment, staring at his computer screen. His savings had nearly run dry. He had gone from luxury offices and five-star suites to living in a cheap rental with flickering lights and peeling paint. And worst of all, the one name he saw everywhere, the name that haunted him the most, was Maureen Davis. She was on hospitality blogs, news articles, even industry conferences, where she spoke about fair treatment in the workplace. Langston's own former colleagues praised her. She had become a rising star. And he? He was nothing. He stared at the screen, jaw clenched, seething. And the woman he once humiliated? She was thriving. Maureen's final reflection. Meanwhile, Maureen sat in her new office, gazing out at the city skyline. Langston had once tried to break her, to make her feel small. But in the end, his cruelty had only made her stronger. She had used his own corruption against him. She had taken back her dignity. And now? She wasn't just a hotel employee. She was a leader. A protector. A woman who had turned her pain into power. She leaned back in her chair, a quiet smile on her lips. Langston was gone. But her story had only just begun. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of Regency Luxe's executive office, casting a golden hue over the polished mahogany desk where Maureen sat. She had spent years working toward this moment. But never, in her wildest dreams, did she imagine she would return, not as an employee, but as a leader. She wasn't just here to run a hotel. She was here to change the industry. A new era begins. Maureen adjusted her nameplate on the desk. Maureen Davis, Director of Hospitality Operations. The title felt surreal. Just a few months ago, she had been humiliated and thrown out of this very hotel. Now, she had the power to make sure it never happened to anyone else. There was a knock on her door. Aisha peeked in, smiling. "Maureen, the staff is waiting. They're ready for you." Maureen exhaled, then nodded. This was it. The moment she had fought for. Addressing the staff. The entire hotel staff gathered in the grand ballroom: housekeepers, waiters, bellhops, receptionists, security guards. These were the people Langston had oppressed. Now, they stood together. Maureen stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room, clearing her throat. "Some of you remember me," she began, scanning the crowd. "Some of you saw me get humiliated right here in this hotel." Murmurs spread through the room. "But today," Maureen continued, "I stand here as proof that no one can take away your dignity unless you let them." Silence. She took a deep breath. For too long, this hotel was run by fear. People were afraid to speak up. Afraid to lose their jobs. Afraid of what would happen if they asked for the respect they deserved. She let those words settle before speaking again. "That ends today. A single clap echoed from the back. Then another. Then, like a wave of change, the entire room burst into applause. Tears welled in some employees' eyes. Others nodded firmly, as if finally realizing they mattered. Maureen's new mission. After the meeting, Aisha approached her. "You really did it," she said, voice full of admiration. "You took him down, and now, you're in charge." Maureen smiled, but her expression turned thoughtful. "I didn't do this just to take Langston down," she said. "I did it so no one else ever has to go through what we did." Aisha nodded, understanding. This wasn't just about one corrupt man. This was about changing the culture of the entire industry. And Maureen was just getting started. Later that night, Maureen sat alone in her office, reflecting on everything. Langston was gone. The employees were free. But more importantly, she had learned a truth that she would carry for the rest of her life. Dignity isn't something given. It's something you take back, piece by piece, with courage. And when people try to break you, you don't fight for revenge. You fight for justice. With a deep breath, Maureen turned off her office light and stepped out into the hotel, her hotel. Because no matter how many people had tried to tear her down, she had risen. And nothing would stop her again.